But at the same time, these five monoamines really control a lot of things that are going on in your body. And without any of these, if you have a low level of any of these, of course, now you got a really serious problem, especially dopamine and serotonin. You're going to be depressed. You're not going to be able to be happy at any juncture. Really kind of exciting if you think about it. Dopamine, extremely important neurotransmitter. It's one of the most abundant neurotransmitters in the brain. It affects two very important areas. One of them is the mesostriatal system, and the other is the mesolimbocortical system. And we're going to talk about those two right now. Mesostriatal has to do with happiness, and mesolimbocortical has to do with movement. So, you know, those two things are really, 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 really important. There you go. This is amazing. The elevators all work at the same time. You guys came from different elevators. That's the amazing thing. You came out of that one and you guys came out of the other. All right. Anyway, we're talking about dopamine. We're talking about the monoamine neurotransmitters. And as I was telling Joe, probably the most important group of neurotransmitters that we have. The catecholamines, of course, acetylcholine has to do with a lot of different things that keep us alive. The monoamines have to do with fight and flee, have to do with happiness, or have to do with making you happy, the pleasure center. Serotonin, of course, has to do with happiness, and melatonin has to do with going to sleep. Interestingly, serotonin and melatonin both have to do with sleep. So they are actually very similar. Their chemical structure is very similar, serotonin and melatonin. Dopamine is one of the, as I was telling Joe, one of the most. It's one of the most abundant neurotransmitters. It affects two different areas: the mesostriatal system and the mesolimbocortical system. Mesolimbocortical system has to do with movement, and mesostriatal system has to do with happiness. Has to do with pleasure. That's the pleasure center, the mesostriatal area. The mesostriatal system includes the substantia nigra to the striatum, caudate, and putamen. It's right in the very middle of the brain. And I'll show you a picture of it. I can show you a picture right now. Yeah, it's right in the middle of the brain, as you can see. It's this structure right here, primarily, is that structure. And right at the bottom is this substantia nigra. But those three structures are right here in the middle, the putamen, and this is a caudate nucleus, and then right underneath it is a striatum. So that's the very middle of your brain. And of course, you have two of them, one on each side. This area of the brain does not actually have very many nerve cells, so what nerves there are can control thousands of synapses. Degeneration of this system can result in Parkinson's disease, which means that I got everything backwards, doesn't it? Okay, so the mesostriatal system is the one that controls your movement. And so this area is crucial to motor control. This can be caused by aging in select individuals, drug use, or frequent and prolonged head trauma. If we find out somebody has Parkinson's disease, we always look at them and look at their history to try to figure out what is it that has caused their Parkinson's disease. There is Parkinson's disease that is caused by aging, but most of the people that we know that have Parkinson's disease, they did something to cause their Parkinson's disease. Muhammad Ali, of course, who died last year, Muhammad Ali had Parkinson's disease from his 40s into his 70s. Who else do we know that has Parkinson's disease? Linda Ronstadt has Parkinson's disease. Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's disease. I don't think they're boxers, are they? I don't know.
Michael J. Fox is a wolf.
He was a wolf, that is correct. He was the teen wolf. Really good actor, looks like my brother. I have a brother that looks just like Michael J. Fox. It's really kind of shocking. Every time I see Michael J. Fox, I think of my brother. Of course, he was in military intelligence too. I don't know what that has to do with anything. Okay, so what do you think happened to Michael J. Fox that caused Parkinson's disease? He got Parkinson's in his 30s. What the hell did he do? Somebody pop him in the head a couple times? Must have been something. He's
Well,
Canadian.
Doc too much, yeah. That's his name, Doc, was it Doc, right?
Yeah, he's Doc Hollywood, of course he was. And that's when he first developed Parkinson's symptoms, during Doc Hollywood. So do we have any idea what was going on with him? Of course we do. He snorted a lot of cocaine because he was a very famous and popular actor in Hollywood, and this is during the 1980s. In the 1980s, there was a lot of people snorting cocaine. So what about Linda Ronstadt? Linda Ronstadt had to have her nose reconstructed twice because she snorted so much cocaine. Yeah, but she developed Parkinson's later on, and she's in her 60s. So Michael J. Fox developed his in his 30s. So probably he would have developed Parkinson's anyway. It was just, the cocaine just accelerated the process. And now he's got a really interesting problem. He actually wrote a book where he admitted that he was drinking too much and partying too much. And what he meant by partying was snorting cocaine. And that probably caused this problem. So a lot of these problems can be exacerbated by drugs. So that's one of the things you have to be careful of and stay away from. Right in the middle of the brain is the mesostriatal system. And I apologize, I got everything backwards. This is a system that has to do with movement. And there's a substantia nigra at the very bottom of that whole structure that we were talking about before. Substantia nigra just means a black substance is what it means. So if you look at this stuff, you chop into somebody's brain and try to find the substantia nigra. It's a dark area at the bottom of the putamen. The mesolimbocortical system is right in front of the mesostriatal area. This area projects into the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the nucleus accumbens. If you overstimulate this area, the dopamine pathways seem to cause schizophrenia. Whoops, causes schizophrenia. There are 5 dopamine receptor sites, and you know how smart scientists are. They figure they give them really cool names like, you know, D1, D2, D3, D4, D5. Anyway, so D1 and D5 are very similar, but they're very much different from D2, D3, and D4. The receptor sites that we really care about are the D2 sites, because if we can block these D2 sites, we can relieve the symptoms of schizophrenia. So that's what we try to do with our medications, our antipsychotic medications. We try to block the D2 sites. Now we could block the D3, D4, D1, D5 sites, but that wouldn't work. That wouldn't help anybody. So it doesn't always work. It's only the D2 sites that have to do with schizophrenia. So with the mesolimbocortical system, we are trying to block schizophrenia. So if we're looking for antipsychotics, and the reality is psychology developed because we were trying to control the symptoms of schizophrenia. So all of these medications, all the medications that you hear about, Prozac, the anti-anxiety medications, all of these drugs were developed looking for a cure for schizophrenia, as confusing as that may be. But we were trying to control those symptoms because they were so severe. So we were trying to do that, and that's why we discovered some of the antipsychotics. We're going to talk about an antipsychotic in just a second, well, later on in the chapter. Norepinephrine is released from 3 different areas of the brainstem. The impact of the neurons producing norepinephrine expands broadly throughout the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. This transmitter is believed to affect a broad range of behavioral and physiological functions. So one of the things that we can do if we have if somebody is reacting abnormally, if they're depressed, potentially we can increase their norepinephrine their norepinephrine effort. Now I can't talk at all. Johnny just came in, and so now I can't talk. Okay, thanks a lot, Johnny. a real pal. Noradrenaline, we can just increase this substance. Of course, it has two names. One's Greek and one's Latin. So we have two names for the same substance, norepinephrine and noradrenaline. And if we can increase this, then potentially we can make people happier. The problem is if we increase it too much, they start acting erratically. They start acting psychotic to some extent. So you have to be kind of careful with this stuff. You really don't want to increase it too much. It's like serotonin. If you increase serotonin a whole lot, it makes the person happy, but if you increase it too much, now all of a sudden, that's what ecstasy does. It just floods the brain with serotonin. So they hug everybody because they love everybody. I don't know if I want that much serotonin splashing around in my brain. Anyway, norepinephrine is another one of those substances that we can make people happy just by increasing the level. Norepinephrine has the effect of making you feel like you can do anything. So if we can increase it a lot, if we can increase it too much, of course you think you're on top of the world, that nobody can touch you. You know, it's one of those, I'm the strongest, most handsome person in the whole wide world. And that's what it does. It just makes you feel confident, as confusing as that is. So what if you have too much confidence? Is that possible? Well, yeah, I guess it is. It really is. Whoops, I went backwards. Sorry. Serotonin is classified as an indolamine. It's a subclassification, of course, of monoamines. It's a large area of the brain are controlled by serotonin-producing neurons. Few neurons actually release serotonin. The main grouping is in an area of the brainstem called the raphe nucleus, and as you can see, these areas are the areas, this is where most of your serotonin comes from. There are 15 different types of serotonin receptors, and they're really kind of difficult to talk about because only a couple of them have to do with happiness. Serotonin also controls your sex drive, as confusing as that is. It affects your sex drive in your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus, the amount of testosterone you have in your hypothalamus regulates your sex drive. So serotonin is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that controls the testosterone. Okay, so as we're wandering around campus, we see all these males, and the reality is these males are under control. They're completely under control. Why are they under control? Well, their testosterone is being controlled by their serotonin level. What has happened in humans is that anybody with too high a testosterone level has fallen out of the gene pool. Can I say that? Okay. If they were oversexed, what happened? Well, somebody killed them. Well, somebody got rid of them because they were just too oversexed. Right? Does that make sense? So almost all males have the proper amount of testosterone, the proper amount of serotonin, because we are we live in groups, and we couldn't live in groups if there was one of the persons was oversexed. We can have an undersexed person, that's okay, but an oversexed person, you can't tolerate that because they will try to reproduce with everybody. And of course, who's going to put up with that? The women aren't going to put up with it, and certainly the males are going to be upset because, does that make sense? Once upon a time, if you were the king of whatever, you got to have sex with everybody. Yeah. So if you were the king of England, for example, then you had first night rights. They had the right to have sex with the new bride the first night. That was, I know, it's kind of strange. Yeah, the Brits. Aren't they the goofiest people in the world? And it embarrasses me to say that I have English ancestors. Okay, so what are we talking about? Amino acids as transmitters. Some amino acids act as neurotransmitters. Excitatory amino acids, there are two. There are excitatory and inhibitory. The excitatory amino acids are glutamate and aspartate. and the inhibitory amino acids are glycine and gamma-aminobutyric acid. The excitatory glutamate is actually the most abundant. It's the most common excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA is actually the most common inhibitory neurotransmitter. So of all of the neurotransmitters, the amino acids are the most abundant, the glutamates. Yeah. Okay. Glutamate uses both ionotropic receptors and metabotropic receptors. Remember, metabotropic are slow as death, and ionotropic are really rapid. The ionotropic receptors are AMPA receptors, kainate receptors, and NMDA receptors. These are really, well, the AMPA is especially important because this is how you learn things. Remember, we have all that upregulation and downregulation. Well, AMPA controls all of that. So we really need this stuff. It teaches us things so that we can learn something. Potentially, it takes 3 times to practice something before you get it. It's one of the reasons why I test you the way that I do, because you're getting the information now. Potentially, you'll get it when you read it, and then you'll write it down when you take the test. So that's 3 times, and hopefully you'll remember some of the stuff that I'm giving you, some of this important stuff. And it's not the fact that you remember it in my class. It's not the fact that you pass this class and get a good grade. It is to you, of course, but I want you to learn this information. It's that you can take it to another class, that you'll remember this stuff later on, that you'll remember, oh, wait a minute, you know, some of this stuff, this is how it really works. And that's really the most important thing. It's not really passing this class. It's taking this information forward and having this information in your mind. Potentially something's going to happen in the future. Somebody's going to start taking a medication, and they're going to say, well, I'm taking Prozac. And you're going to say, well, I understand how Prozac works and why Prozac works. It increases your serotonin level. How does it do that? It blocks the reuptake of serotonin, so it leaves more in the synapse. So you'll know all of this. And at the same time, you'll think, wait a minute, isn't it serotonin that controls your sex drive? So now this individual is complaining that they have a really low sex drive. Well, that makes sense. It's very logical. If you increase the serotonin level, you're going to be controlling the sex drive more than you should have. And potentially it's going to make the individual, if it's a male of course, they're going to be impotent. But as far as females are concerned, it's also going to make them less likely to want to have sex. Okay, so we have that information in our minds because we're learning all of this stuff. Okay, so why do we learn things? We learn things because of the AMPA receptors. The NMDA receptors are involved in information processing as well. So NMDA and AMPA have to do with learning. And these are the glutamates. And they are the ionotropic receptors. And this is one of the reasons. Remember, it's an ionotropic receptor. So we learn very relatively rapidly because that information can pass very quickly through the membrane into the cell. So we learn this stuff very, very quickly, and that's the reason why. Glutamate has a feature known as excitotoxicity, whereby a neuron that is depolarized due to injury or stroke will die. And of course, the glutamates are cleared by astrocytes, you know, those glial cells, the astrocytes. So this is one of the reasons why we talk about blows to the head can cause you to forget things. Why we tell you not to drink alcohol. Alcohol destroys brain cells. Well, if we're destroying these brain cells, what are we doing? We're taking away your capability of learning things. We talk about, I talk about marijuana all the time, and I apologize for picking on marijuana. I'm sure marijuana is just a wonderful substance, but the reality is that it slows down the process of learning, and the reason it does is because it blocks all this stuff. So it blocks things, and it makes it less likely that you're going to remember anything. How long does it take to clear out of your system? About a month. 28 days. Stays in your system for 28 days. And if it's in there, it's affecting you. So you smoke pot this weekend, you're going to be, well, not as bright as you would have been for the next month, for all the month of October, you're just going to be fairly non-functional. And if you've ever been around somebody that smokes pot on the weekends, how does their week go? Well, they're kind of happy at the beginning of the week, but then they get kind of slow, and then they get grouchy at the end of the week until they can smoke some more pot. Pot does that to you, makes you grouchy because you don't have a high enough level in your system. Anyway, I'll stop picking on that stuff. Alcohol's bad. It's really bad. It destroys brain cells. It destroys brain cells, and then you have to clear them out. Well, see, if you look at somebody that is an alcoholic, especially at the end of their alcoholism, when they're really close to not being around anymore, they can't remember anything. As a matter of fact, they have that disease. What is that disease? Wait a minute. There's a disease that they get where they can't remember anything. All they can do is repeat things. They can't think of things themselves. It has to do with vitamin B1 deficiency. Can't remember what it is. I'm sorry. I'm mumbling again. GABA receptors can be divided into 3 types. Remember, we've got dopamine 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The same brilliant person probably named the GABA receptor sites A, B, and C. I know. We could have called them Charlie or John or something, but no, A, B, and C. GABA receptors contain chloride channels and are ionotropic. GABA-C receptors are also ionotropic with chloride channels, but they have a different function than the GABA receptors. The GABA-B receptors are metabotropic, so it's a much slower process, of course. Drugs that block the action of GABA can cause seizures, and this is really something that we don't want to happen. So we can give you a drug that makes you go into seizures, as stupid as that would be. I know. Why would we do that? Sometimes we put people into comas so that they can repair. A lot of times when you're injured, you're scared, and the fear raises your heart rate and slows down the healing process. So sometimes what we will do is we will put people into a coma so that the repair process can be accelerated. As confusing as that is. Or not. Peptides. I was thinking about this morning. I was reading this and going over my lecture, and I was thinking about this. Really kind of fascinating. Many peptides have a prominent role in the brain as neurotransmitters, of course. The opioid peptides, there are 3 of them: endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins. So there's 3 different types of opioid receptors. There's 3 things that block pain. They're analgesics, so they block pain: endorphin, enkephalin, and dynorphin. Now, as I've told you before, opiates don't work on me. I think I told you that. Opiates don't work on me, so you can shoot me up with all the morphine you want, and it's not going to do anything but piss me off, probably, because I told you not to give me that damn stuff. When I had my heart attack, I kept telling them, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But they wanted to give it to me anyway because, well, that's the protocol. You give morphine to everybody, no matter what. And that's how you control their pain. Well, it doesn't work on me. Wait a minute, if it doesn't work on you, let's give it to me anyway. Just to see. Maybe you don't really know. They keep doing this to me. They keep giving me these drugs and telling me that it's supposed to work, and I keep saying, it's not working. It's not working. Well, that's our protocol, so we have to give it to you. You guys are idiots. Aren't they idiots? They're idiots. Anyway, so we have 3 of them. Now the reality is I play a lot of sports, I get hurt a lot. Well, I don't get hurt that much, but when I get hurt, I can play through my pain just like anybody else. Well, normally when you play through your pain, it's because you're pumping endorphins into your system, and that's blocking the pain. So obviously I have other things that block my pain. Obviously. So endorphins aren't the only substance. However, endorphins that is the receptor site that works on opiates. Not dynorphin, not enkephalins. It's the endorphins. So if opiates don't work on me, evidently I don't have these receptor sites. But I do have pain control a pain control mechanism, and it probably has something to do with enkephalins and dynorphins. Is that good? Well, I don't know. Pisses the doctors off because they can't shoot me up with something. Substance P, cholecystokinin, neurotensin, and neuropeptide Y are also peptides. All of these are found in the gut and the spinal cord. Cholecystokinin controls your gallbladder. It has to do with digestion. Substance P has to do with pain. Neurotensin has to do with controlling the your neurological system, and neuropeptide Y has to do with glucose. Other peptides, these are some of the last ones that we've discovered, the peptides. We weren't exactly sure what was going on. So we've known about opiates forever. I mean, the Chinese used to smoke that dope. Those dopey Chinese used to smoke this stuff. But we had no idea why it was working, as confusing as that is. There are two pituitary hormones, oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin, I told you last time, is a substance that controls nesting in most animals. So if you inject an animal with oxytocin, they will build a nest, they will stay around in an area so that they can control that area. It's for a female that's about to give birth. They have an excess amount of oxytocin. In humans, of course, we don't nest, or we do to some extent, but not that much. Oxytocin controls the flow of your mammary glands. So if you are breastfeeding, oxytocin is the reason why. We can also induce labor with oxytocin. So if we give you a shot of oxytocin, and you're not exactly sure if you should, if you're going into labor, we can give you a shot of oxytocin, and potentially it'll kick you into labor, which is kind of fun. Vasopressin has to do with the antidiuretic hormone. As you are drinking fluids, your body's telling you you're either thirstier or you're not thirsty, and that's what vasopressin does. It controls that urge to drink. Of course, just saying drink makes me thirsty, so I will take a swallow here. As we saw with the nurses, those goofy girls that were talking about opening the door or not opening the door, neurotransmitters can only work with select receptor sites in a form of lock and key. The lock of course the lock is there, that is the receptor site. The key is the neurotransmitter that is either unlocking it or not. However, there are neurotransmitters that can adhere to that receptor site without doing anything. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Most neurotransmitters work on more than one receptor. For example, acetylcholine, of course, it works on your muscles, it works on your memory, it also works on your heart, and sleep has to do with the sleep and your heart. The vagal nerve actually controls your digestion. It also controls your heartbeat, which is kind of interesting. It's not that interesting. If you get this thing severed, we got a problem. We got a real serious problem. Because you can't digest food anymore. And if you're a male, you can't have an erection. So, not that that's important. I would think your heart beating and digesting food is a little bit more important than whether you can have an erection or not. But, I mean, it's just the way it works. Neurotransmitters in the body are known as endogenous ligands. That means internally occurring. Endogenous, anything that's endogenous is inside. Anything exogenous is outside. So when we give you a shot of Demerol, we give you a shot of anything, penicillin, we give you any medication at all, it's an exogenous substance that we're giving you. It's exogenous because it's not naturally occurring in your body. Well, there you go. Man-made drugs or exogenous ligands work because they either act as a neurotransmitter and inhibit the neuron, or they block the action of a transmitter and keep it from affecting the neuron. So exogenous has to do with something that we give somebody, and that is a man-made drug. Exogenous ligands. Some drug molecules bind to the receptor molecule for a long time, while others only for a short time. So they need to control my blood pressure. I have high blood pressure. They need to control my blood pressure. So I took a pill this morning. What did I take? Metoprolol. I took metoprolol this morning, calcium channel blocker. It works on your body for 12 hours. And then I'll take another one tonight so that I don't, die during my sleep or whatever. But it has a long effect. It has a relatively long effect. And some drugs do that, but some drugs, of course, are shorter than that, have a short effect. So if I were having a heart attack right now, one of the things that happens during a heart attack is that your body tenses up. So they need to take away the pain, and that's usually what they use morphine for. But you can also control the pain with nitroglycerin, a nitroglycerin pill. But nitroglycerin only works for about 15 minutes. So it's a short-acting substance that will block the pain. So the first thing they'll do is they'll try to control the pain probably with nitroglycerin. They'll give you a nitroglycerin pill. Not the morphine. Morphine is a longer acting substance. And actually what they're trying to do is control your pain, but by controlling the pain, they're also slowing down the heart, because it's the pain that is causing your heart to beat so rapidly. A drug with a high affinity for a receptor will stay with the receptor longer, so less is needed to be effective. And of course, this is really important. When we're talking about how much of the drug should we give you, if we give you too much, we kill you. We give you too little, it doesn't have an effect on you. So we need to know exactly how much works on select individuals. Now this is really kind of interesting, because people who come from different evolutionary backgrounds, say somebody from Asia or somebody or a Native American in the United States, they're going to be different than white people. Really? Yes, black people are going to be different than white people. White people are going to be different than natives. Natives are going to be different than Asians. For a lot of different reasons. Well, one, you evolved eating different foods. So drugs that work on you guys may not work on us. And a good example of that is Europeans evolved eating a lot of fat and sugars, right? And you guys didn't. Okay. So when you eat white man's food, this has been going on for the last 400 years, if you eat food that we eat, there's too much sugar and too much fat in it. Now you can tolerate the fat, it's the sugar you can't handle. And then you get diabetes. And that's a problem. The sugar tastes good. It really does. So what did you guys do for sugar before those crazy white people came over here? Where'd you get your sweets? You didn't eat a lot of sweets.
Maybe from the fruits?
Right, but which foods are we talking about here? What kind of sweet foods are we talking about?
Like berries?
Berries, exactly. So, and this is a huge deal up north, because they have what they call June berries. They pick all these berries, and that was their sweets. And what they would do, they'd mix it with tallow, they'd mix it with fat, or they'd mix it with meat, and then they would make pemmican. And then they'd eat it all year long. But this was, they needed the fat, of course, because if they couldn't find any meat to eat, they would eat the fat, and it would keep them alive throughout the winter, throughout the long winter. Anyway, okay. I mean, all that's logical, right? One of the things that happened when I went to Asia was that I started eating Asian food, or for some reason we were given Asian food, and it went right through me. I couldn't tolerate Asian food, as confusing as that is. The rice just went right through me. They used fermented fish sauce, which they find just the most appetizing thing in the whole wide world. I mean, it's fermented fish sauce, but as far as my gut was concerned, it was poison. It was a toxin because it was fermented. So but the Vietnamese used to eat that thing like it was candy. They thought it was the best stuff in the whole wide world. So they're eating something that my body considers rotten and they could tolerate it. Same thing happens down in Mexico. You go down to Mexico, they eat the hottest stuff in the whole wide world. They eat these habaneros, and there's, I don't know, nitroglycerin chilies or something. And they can eat these things, but you get somebody else goes down there and they can't tolerate it. They can't tolerate the food. So we have to be very careful. Drugs are the same way. Okay. So sometimes the drugs may work on me, but they won't work on you. In the case of opiates, opiates may work on you guys, but that doesn't work on me. Why doesn't it work on me? I don't know. It worked on my mother, it worked on my dad, worked on my sister, worked on my brother, but it doesn't work on me. So there's something biochemically alien about me, I guess. I won't talk about it. Aliens. Anyway, so people are different, and this is one of the things you have to remember. Some drugs affect African Americans differently. If we give African Americans sulfa drugs, it'll kick them into some African Americans, depending on how much white ancestry they have. It can potentially will kick them into anemia, and they'll die. They'll get anemia and die. So we can't give them sulfa drugs. So how do we know whether they can take sulfa drugs or not? It has to do, the way we understand it is that if they are allergic to eggs, then they're highly sensitive to sulfa drugs. As confusing as that is. But there are some white people that are allergic to eggs and they can't take penicillin. Wait a minute, this is making too much sense. So people are different, or not. So when we look at select groups of individuals, we have to understand what their ancestry is and whether they can tolerate select drugs. Now, unfortunately, of course, as with me, when I tell the doctor that I can't tolerate opiates, that opiates don't work on me, they don't believe me because I'm white. And most white people can tolerate opiates. As stupid as that is. Anyway. A drug with a low affinity for a receptor will require a higher concentration of the drug to be effective. If both a high and low affinity drug is present, the drug with the high affinity will interfere with the low affinity drug. There you go. Interfere. Agonists do the same job as the transmitter, and the antagonists block the job of the transmitter. We talk about this all the time. It's either an agonist or an antagonist. But as it turns out, there's lots of different types of agonists. There's lots of different types of antagonists. Some drugs bind with the receptor and make the receptor do the opposite of what they are intended to do. For example, they inhibit to excite or excite to inhibit. These drugs are called inverse agonists. So even though you're giving it to inhibit, it actually excites. So you get the opposite effect. Okay. Sometimes if you take a drug with another chemical, it will cause a reaction that isn't a 1+1 reaction, but it's a 1+10 reaction. This is what happens if you take barbiturates with alcohol. Alcohol accelerates the process. It gets it into the system faster, and the person may kill themselves. So if you take barbiturates with alcohol. So you have to be really careful. A lot of times you can't take, the drugs will tell you not to take it with alcohol because the alcohol will either accelerate the process or it will cancel out the process. This happens from time to time as well. So you have to be really careful as to how you take your medication. Some drugs bind to the receptor in a place that does not bind to the transmitter. When the transmitter binds to the receptor, the drug does not allow the transmitter to activate the neuron. So even though it's not at the receptor site, it's blocking this from working. It's blocking the receptor from working because you have attached it in another place. So it's not actually blocking the receptor site. It's actually making the receptor site non-functional. And this kind of stuff happens from time to time. Since the drug does not bind to the transmitter receptor site, it is called a noncompetitive antagonist. This is all really important as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned because we need to know why they work. We need to know why they work because we need to know whether it's going to work with a select group of individuals or not. There was a drug, the Scarelli. You know Scarelli, the guy that jacked up the price of something 7,500 times or something. He bought the company and decided he was going to start, oh, it had to do with AIDS. It's an AIDS drug, so he decided that he was going to buy this pharmaceutical company or buy this drug, and he has control over it, so he can charge whatever he wants. So he decided he's going to make a lot of money, and he raised the price from $12 to like, $10,000 or something ridiculous. As stupid as that is. But it only works on select individuals, which seems kind of strange. Okay, so we're talking about an AIDS drug. Non-competitive antagonists, of course, they block it, but they don't take up the receptor site. Drugs that act in a similar manner but activate the neuron are known as non-competitive agonists. In other words, they don't block it, so they're agonists, and they're non-competitive because they take up another receptor site. In other words, they have attached here, and they make this open or whatever it's supposed to do. But they make it the neurotransmitter functional, despite the fact that they're not taking up that receptor site. As confusing as that is. Okay, so we've got all kinds of drugs, and they do all kinds of interesting things, and we need to know what it is. So, and the reason we need to know what it is because we need to know if I give you this drug and I give you this drug, are the two going to compete with one another, or are they going to help you? Are they going to be synergistic? In other words, is it going to accelerate the amount of impact it has on your body to the extent that it will kill you? I need to know that. I need to know all this information. It's very important for pregnant women. We need to know if this medication actually can cross the placental barrier. We need to know what kind of an effect it's going to have on the baby. Because we don't want to hurt the baby. We don't care about the mother. No, I'm just kidding. Of course we care about the mother. The drug respirine, it acts as a sedative and as an antihypertensive. It's also an antipsychotic. When we talk about sedative here, we're talking about a really heavy sedative to the extent that it's used as an antipsychotic, or used to. It's not being used at all anymore. Respirine inhibits the storage of catecholamine transmitters, the dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine in the vesicles. In other words, these vesicles are always full of dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. It won't let the vesicles accumulate any of those. Only 3 people have my telephone number. I don't understand. It keeps making funny noises. Yeah. That's why I don't like cell phones. See, there's nothing there. Why did it make noise? Can you imagine Gold Galaxy? No idea what that means. Gold Galaxy? Does anybody know what that is? Is it a video game? I don't know. I have no idea. No, I can't imagine Gold Galaxy because I have no clue what it is. Anyway, okay, so that's reserpine. What a stupid name. Anyway, it acts as an antipsychotic. Why does it act as an antipsychotic? Well, it blocks dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine especially. Remember, if we get too much norepinephrine, it makes us act erratically. It gives us feelings of grandeur. So that's really how it controls the schizophrenia, by blocking the norepinephrine. Colchicine is an anti-inflammatory and a painkiller. It's used on people with gout, and I have gout. I control it with my diet. I don't eat fish, and I don't drink fermented beverages. And I don't eat that damn Newton, that crap.
Is getting gout from meats?
Like
red meat?
That's a
Or
good question.
how did you get gout?
How did I get gout? I'm hypersensitive to uric acid. Okay, so I need to stay away from purines. If I can control my purine intake, then I'll be okay. So all I have to do is not eat tuna fish. can't eat any fish, and I can't drink beer, and I can't drink wine. But I don't drink beer and wine anyway, so I'm okay. But so where did I get gout? It's just the way my body functions. I started getting gout at 18, and I can tell you that I certainly didn't eat really rich foods. They used to think it was caused by rich foods. So, but it just has to do with the way your body metabolizes food. You know, some people have one problem, some people have another. Mine is gout, and I have to control. I can control it with my diet. If I drink too much milk, I'll have a problem. Potentially, I'll have a problem. Or if I get stupid and eat fish. Omega-3s, I can't take omega-3s because it's fish oil, and my foot starts swelling, which is always attractive and very painful, I can assure you. Oh, poor people with gout. Okay, so colchicine works because it blocks the maintenance of microtubules and axonal transport, and because of that, it controls the inflammation and it controls the pain. By making the neurotransmitters or the neurons fairly non-functional, because it controls the microtubules and whether something is moving down the axon. Caffeine, does anybody drink caffeine? Eat coffee? Is that coffee? There you go. Does it work? Does it wake you up? Does it?
I think mine is like a habit. I have to have like at least 1 or 2 in the morning, that's it.
So if you stop drinking coffee, do you get a headache? Do you get all jittery? Does it make you strange or confused or?
No. But I don't drink it every day.
Does it make you crazy?
No, I mean cranky.
Oh, you
I
get
don't
cranky
have it, yeah.
if you don't
Usually
drink
my
coffee. You get
patience is
cranky.
really short if I don't have it.
Is that right? Okay. My brother's like that. I have a brother that's like that. My mother was like that. She was really sensitive to caffeine. My dad wasn't at all. He'd drink pot after pot after pot and go take a nap. It didn't affect him at all.
Do you drink coffee?
I don't like the taste of it, but I do drink caffeine, but when I drink caffeine, it doesn't wake me up. It doesn't do anything to me. There's obviously something wrong with me, I guess. It doesn't affect my son, it doesn't affect my daughter, it doesn't affect my dad. It didn't affect my dad, he's gone now, but yeah, so,
What happens when you take a pill with coffee?
Take a pill with coffee. It should accelerate it in your system. Should accelerate the process. Okay, so you can do that, I guess. Some people control ADHD with coffee. So you just feed your 5-year-old coffee,
How does that work?
and it slows them down. The reason you have ADHD is because, let's see how this is. The reason you have ADHD is because things in your brain are skipping over different neurons. So when you take caffeine, it forces, or when you take speed, when you take an amphetamine, it forces everything to work, all the neurons to work. They can't skip over any of them now. So as before, since things were jumping around, the child was very erratic, and they couldn't concentrate on select things, because if they're concentrating on this and then something else happens over here, all of a sudden they're over here instead of over here. Okay. Because things are skipping around in their brain. But amphetamines or caffeine it doesn't really slow the process down. It forces each neuron to function properly, so that instead of skipping around, now they can concentrate on one thing. They feel like it's making them dull. It's slowing the process down, but it's not really slowing anything down. What it is, it's allowing them to concentrate on one thing, and it will complete the circuit. Whereas before it was jumping over things, so they lost interest very rapidly. They tended to lose interest very rapidly. That's why it works. So let's take some caffeine. Okay, so what caffeine does, it competes with the inhibitor adenosine which prevents the inhibitory effect. So because it blocks this stuff, and this stuff normally slows the process down, it blocks the adenosine. Now the adenosine isn't blocked anymore. It's not blocking your neurons. So now it accelerates the process. It wakes you up. It makes you feel erratic or whatever it does. I can drink one of those 5-hour things, nothing. I get nothing. Why the hell would I drink it if it's not doing anything? It tastes like, well, it doesn't taste like good. I won't tell you what it tastes like. But it doesn't taste good. Well, that's the way coffee tastes to me. I don't like it. My son drinks it, but I don't like it at all. But he acts like he's got a habit, but I think just like you, it's a habit. It doesn't slow him down to not drink coffee. And he doesn't get grouchy if he doesn't drink coffee. Okay, calcium channel blockers. I told you that I take a calcium channel blocker. I also take a beta blocker. I don't take verapamil, but I do take metoprolol, which is relatively similar. It's also a calcium channel blocker. Calcium channel blockers block the calcium channel, and thus they won't allow the activation of the neuron to release the synaptic vesicles, and that slows the process down. In my case, we're trying to control my blood pressure. My blood pressure is too high, so my heart rate is higher than it should be. Actually, if I look at my heart rate right now, it should be a little bit high because I'm lecturing. And it's telling me that my battery is almost dead. Not in me, but on my Fitbit. What is my 123? My goodness gracious. I took my blood pressure pill this morning. Anyway, it slows everything down. Amphetamines are calcium channel blockers. They work as calcium channel blockers as well. They inhibit the inhibitory neurons that control the release of catecholamines, especially adrenaline or epinephrine, making an individual feel excited and full of energy, and that's why amphetamines work. Black widow venom, not that anybody should ever be bitten by a black widow spider. It over-releases acetylcholine and eventually causes seizures. It will also cause death in the area. It will kill whatever tissue that's around. It will destroy the tissue. And the reason is because the tissue can't get blood because it's exciting everything. It's a vasoconstrictor, and because of that, it strangles the area for blood. But if it gets into your system, it will cause the over-release of acetylcholine, and you'll go into seizures and die. That's why black widows kill things, and their venom is strong enough to kill a human, as large as we are. If they bit a horse, it's just too large. It wouldn't kill it, but they can kill us. Cocaine and amphetamines inhibit reuptake mechanisms prolonging synaptic activity. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, prolong the synaptic activity of serotonin, which in turn, of course, combats depression. And as I said before, it can decrease your sex drive because it also regulates your testosterone in your hypothalamus. So if you have too much serotonin, if a guy takes serotonin, he probably is impotent. He can't have sex if he takes a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Doesn't always happen. It really all depends on how much serotonin we're dealing with anyway. We're also dealing with how much SSRI the guy is taking. If he's older, his testosterone, you lose testosterone with age. It goes down like 5% every decade. So potentially, if he's an older gentleman, then the Prozac's going to make him impotent. He's not going to be able to have an erection because of his testosterone. He's not going to have a sex drive. He's not going to have a sex drive. If you don't have a sex drive, then you don't want to have sex, and of course, you certainly can't have an erection. Anyway, okay, so serotonin. We increase serotonin, it affects your sex drive. Alcohol increases the number of receptors for the inhibitory transmitter GABA. Antipsychotic drugs block dopamine receptor sites, as we already have talked about. Curare blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites. So why does alcohol put you to sleep? It puts you to, it's a depressant. We talk about it being a depressant all the time. But why is it a depressant? Because it increases the number of receptor sites for GABA. And it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. And this is why it knocks you out, depending on how much you drink. The more you drink, the more inhibited your receptors, the more inhibited you become. So it increases your GABA level. And since it increases your GABA level, it puts you to sleep.
Is it a vasoconstrictor?
Vasoconstrictor? No, it's not. Alcohol is not. Nicotine is a vasoconstrictor. Cocaine is a vasoconstrictor. Marijuana is a vasodilator. That's why if you look at somebody's eyes who's been smoking marijuana, they're bloodshot. The reason they're bloodshot is because the blood vessels in their eyes are expanded because they're smoking so much pot. If you smoke a lot of pot, it will make you have permanent, well, it's not really permanent, but your eyes will be bloodshot. People that drink a lot will have bloodshot eyes.
So it's a vasodilator?
It's a vasodilator to some extent, yeah. Not only that, but they'll get rosacea. They'll have red. Their cheeks will get all red. And their nose will turn purple. As attractive as a purple nose is, I guess. Anyway, alcohol. It's fun stuff. What else is happening with alcohol? I was going to say something about alcohol.
And their skin, it turns darker?
It turns, yeah, because they get their skin flushes when they drink. If you've ever been around somebody that's Asian, Asians, their skin will flush right almost immediately after they start drinking. It's really kind of interesting. They look embarrassed because, they've got their cheeks are all red, and their nose is turned red. It's really kind of interesting. But it's a different group of individuals, and they don't have as much alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomach to process the alcohol. Alcohol is really made for Europeans because they have lots of alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomach, so they can break this stuff down very, very rapidly. So, they're professional drinkers. I keep saying they're professional drinkers, but they've got all this, this whole mechanism. The people that couldn't handle the booze died out a long time ago. They stopped having babies a long time ago. They dropped out of the gene pool. So you see any white person walking around, they're almost like a professional drunk. They could be a professional drunk if they wanted to be, because that's the way their body works. Okay, it's almost 10 o'clock. Okay. What else was I going to say about alcohol? Funny stuff. Well, it's not that funny, I guess. So you can't remember anything, right? It inhibits it. You have this increase of GABA. It's fascinating if we look at the personality of an individual smoking pot. They tend to be paranoid. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody like this, but they tend to be paranoid when they're smoking pot. Why? Well, it decreases the GABA level. And remember, GABA actually controls your anxiety level. However, an alcoholic is the very opposite. A drunk isn't paranoid at all. They don't worry about anything. Why? Well, they've got this increase of GABA, and of course that controls their anxiety level, and so they have no anxiety whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons why people drink, is because if they're in a dangerous situation, or they feel like they live in a bad neighborhood, or whatever's going on, they'll drink and it'll make them feel better. Why does it make them feel better? Increases your GABA level. Does all that make sense? I know. But, so that same person shouldn't smoke pot, because that'll make them paranoid. Pot makes them paranoid. Okay, so we talked about antipsychotic drugs blocking dopamine receptor sites. Curare blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites, and causing the individual to have seizures and die. The natives of the Amazon River Basin will use curare to kill monkeys. So they'll shoot the monkey with curare. It breaks down eventually so they can eat the meat. But they'll shoot the monkey, and he'll get scurrying around in the canopy, and then all of a sudden he'll just stiffen up and fall to the ground. because they shot him with curare. Of course, if they shot us with curare, we would do the same thing. Except we're probably not up in the trees. We're trying to run away, and all of a sudden, our muscles stop working, and we collapse on the ground. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce this word. I could try. Physostigmine. Stigmine? I don't know. Anyway, we used to call it, what do we call it? It's just a chemical structure that increases the amount of acetylcholine in the system. This is what we give to people with Alzheimer's disease. As I said before, we can't slow down the process of Alzheimer's disease. All we can do is make people seem more normal today. And how can we do that? We can give them this drug. What do we call that stuff? Not Memorex. I can't remember what we used to call it. Anyway, it works because it inhibits acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft. And since it blocks this, and this takes the acetylcholine out of the synaptic cleft, that's how it breaks it down. Since it inhibits this stuff, there's more acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft. This allows acetylcholine to stay in the synapse longer. Acetylcholine has to do with memory, so it seems like these people are either recovering, and this is really kind of well, it's not that cruel. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. This person is losing their memory, so all of a sudden they have memory again. They can remember things. They can remember people's faces, whereas yesterday they couldn't remember them. Why? Because they've got more acetylcholine in their synapse. But it's not going to slow the process down. It's just going to improve their memory for today. As long as they take their drugs, Cognex, that's what we used to call it, Cognex. As long as we give them their Cognex, they're going to be able to remember things today. But of course, as their acetylcholine producing cells degenerate, they're going to lose their memory anyway. This just makes it look like they're okay today. It's really kind of cruel because people will take this stuff and then they think that the person is recovering, and in reality, there's no recovery from Alzheimer's disease. It always gets you in the end. Opiates are analgesics. Analgesic just means a painkiller. So ibuprofen is an analgesic. What else is it? Aspirin, acetaminophen, Tylenol. Opiate receptors are found in the limbic and the hypothalamic areas of the brain, as well as in the gray matter of the brainstem. Synthetic opiates, such as Demerol, can be injected directly into the spinal cord to cause pain blockage. So when somebody has a baby, in the old days we used to give everybody a spinal block to have a baby because I guess the process is not very comfortable. But my mother, when she went in, of course she had all of her babies in the 40s and the 50s. When she went in to have her babies, they gave her a spinal block and she had her babies, and she's knocked out and the baby's knocked out, and that's the way they used to do it. They used to knock you out, and then the baby would come out and everybody's happy. Mother's not screaming, so the doctor's happy, the nurses are happy. Anyway, they used to drug everybody out to have babies. And of course, it pissed my mother off. My mother's a nurse, and she used to be in on these things. And the mother's going, "I'm doing fine, I'm doing fine," and then the doctor would give her a spinal block and knock her out. And my mother thought it was egregious. It was something that didn't need to happen. Anyway, they knocked her out. They knocked him out. And my mother had 6 kids, but she got a spinal block for all 6 of them. I had a brother that weighed 11 pounds when he was born. He was big as a truck. It's like a semi coming out of somebody's reproductive area. It was really kind of a tragedy. My mother was only 4'8". So she's a tiny little thing, and here she gives birth to an 11-pound baby. She normally weighed about 110 pounds. So he was 1/10 of her body weight when he came out, the little monkey. Anyway.
The 11-pound baby, how is he today? Is he big or small or how?
Ugliest guy you ever saw, just the ugliest sin. What else is wrong with my brother? Has an IQ of 160, has a head the size of a basketball. I mean, it's huge. He's got this huge melon head. People think he's attractive, it just bugs the hell out of me. I'm the pretty one in the family. No, I'm not. I have two brothers that the women just fall over these guys because they're so pretty. Nobody ever fell over me. I had to trip them in order to get them to fall down. This is a tragedy. I know Aaron has the same problem I do. No, it's really kind of sad. He's the pretty one in the family. He's the pretty one. He's the smart one. He's also like a right-wing Nazi. He's horrible. It's just terrible. Carries a gun with him wherever he goes. I don't know. I think the guy needs to drink more so he isn't as paranoid. He thinks everybody's out to shoot him. He was in Afghanistan for a while, a tour and a half, and he was in Kuwait in 2007. Made him paranoid. I don't know. Endorphins. Okay, so we're talking about endorphins. Endorphins are endogenous opiates. Okay, but remember we have three of them. There's endorphins, dynorphins, and enkephalins. Endorphins are released with physical activity or select physical manipulation, such as massage, bathing, or breastfeeding. Breastfeeding actually produces endorphins. Why in the world would this happen? Why do women need endorphins when they breastfeed? Is it painful? Is breastfeeding painful?
Can be.
Can be, yeah, especially if the kid's got teeth. And some babies are nibblers. Yeah, and that's not a very comfortable thing. So yes, you do need endorphins to some extent. And this is crazy. I can get a massage and it doesn't do anything at all to me. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't relax me. It doesn't do anything. Why? Because I don't have any endorphins. So it doesn't work on me. My wife can take a bath in a nice warm bath, and she's just like a rag doll. It makes her feel so good. Same way with massage. If she gets a massage, my goodness, she comes home and she's almost comatose. Me, if I get a massage, it doesn't do anything to me. I don't know, there's something wrong with me. Of course, I don't breastfeed, so I don't know. So endorphins don't work on me. I don't have endorphins. Endorphins tend to not only block pain, but they energize as well. So I don't have that aspect. But I do have dynorphins and enkephalins. I must, because I injured myself a lot in my time. One time I was in a airplane crash. Well, it wasn't an airplane, it was a helicopter. And I twisted my knee, and I had to run away. But, and of course I should have been hobbled, I shouldn't have been able to get away, but I was able to run away, and it didn't start hurting until I got back to base. And at that point they realized that I'd torn a ligament, and all kinds of interesting things had happened. Anyway, I was able to run away. I'd walked through the jungle for, I don't know, golly, I must have walked for 5 or 6 miles. I know, I should be dead. They were looking for me, they couldn't figure out where I was. Of course, I'm a little bitty short guy, so I don't take up a whole lot of room. It's about the same size as the Vietnamese, as a matter of fact. Okay, let's talk about marijuana. Marijuana is the most widely used illegal drug in the United States, and now it's legal, of course, in what, 7 states?
Colorado.
It's legal in Colorado, Idaho, California, Washington, Maine, and Colorado, of course. Colorado's the most, I don't know, they seem to be doing more with their marijuana than anybody else. The main active ingredient in marijuana, of course, is tetrahydrocannabinol or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. There's a lot of stuff in marijuana, and people say, "Whoa, look at all the good things in marijuana." Most of none of that good stuff has anything to do with THC. THC is the hallucinogen in marijuana, but it doesn't do any good stuff except make you goofy, I don't know, makes you happy, I guess. The human brain actually maintains receptor sites that turn out to be cannabinoid receptors. And for the longest time, we couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. We really couldn't understand this because it worked on something and we couldn't figure out what it was working on. So was marijuana a natural thing? Did we evolve smoking marijuana? Is that possible? Humans evolved smoking marijuana? Is marijuana natural to North and South America? Is marijuana here? It is now, of course, because it's all over the world. But did it start here? Did humans start smoking this stuff back when we were evolving? Is that why we have these receptor sites? We didn't know. Marijuana comes from Asia. It doesn't come from here. People here weren't smoking marijuana. People in Europe weren't smoking marijuana. Actually, people in Asia weren't smoking marijuana either. They were using it as a medicine. So why do we have these receptor sites? Well, it turns out that it doesn't have anything to do with marijuana. Marijuana has a similar chemical structure to anandamide. And these are anandamide receptor sites. Anandamide has to do with hunger, isn't it?
If it's an illegal drug, why are the states
Making it legal.
having them or selling them?
That was a good question, and we weren't exactly sure what was going to happen. Colorado legalized marijuana and Washington legalized marijuana. The question was, were they going to get their marijuana? It's a federal law that you can't grow marijuana, so where the hell were they going to get their marijuana? That was one of the questions that came up. So they didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, people could grow it. I mean, it's legal in Colorado. They're not going to arrest you. But where are you getting your marijuana was the question. That was the huge question. And the answer was the federal government didn't, they didn't follow the law. They didn't go into Colorado and arrest everybody that they found with marijuana. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating question. Growing marijuana is a federal law. And that has to do with the feds. So when Trump became president, we weren't exactly sure how he felt about marijuana. He seemed to be kind of an interesting fellow. So we didn't know what was going to happen next. You know, all of these states had just legalized marijuana. California, Idaho, and Maine had just legalized, and DC had just legalized marijuana. So what was going to happen next was the question. And we're still not exactly sure because he hasn't come up with a policy. But then Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General, and he's very anti-marijuana, so we thought maybe he was going to start prosecuting people for growing marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
But it all depends on whether they arrest you or whether they don't. They tried to legalize it in Arizona, but they voted it down in Arizona, so I don't know. Colorado's just up the road. It's not that far away, is it? Durango? It is that far away.
Cortez
Okay, so
or Durango.
Durango, I don't know. I haven't been up that way. My son used to live in Colorado. He got there 2 years before they legalized it, and he was there when they legalized it. He was working in a bar at the time. Hates the stuff. Hates it. It was horrible when he went up there. One of the things that happened was, was working with people smoking pot and drinking. And when you smoke pot and drink at the same time, it puts you to sleep. It knocks you out. So they would have people that were smoking pot outside, and they would come in for a beer, and they would drink half the beer and pass out on the table. And marijuana also does something to you. When you're smoking, you don't feel like working. Can I say that? It takes away your volition. So here they've got these guys that are supposed to be working, and what's happening is that they're smoking pot in the alley, and they're coming into work, but they're not doing any work because dude. So my son's like the only guy there that's doing anything, and just really upset. They'd have waitresses sitting down with the patrons, and just jabbering away because it makes you gabby. So she's just sitting down and talking to these people. They've been talking for 15 minutes. So where is their order? Well, it's still on her pad if she wrote it down, and you could read it. It also makes you kind of physically not very functional. Anyway, and that was, he complained about that all the time. Eventually, he just left. He left Colorado. He said, I can't work here anymore because I'm the only one doing any work. How do you buy your marijuana? Well, you work, but if you smoke marijuana, it makes you not very functional. Anyway, well, I'll stop picking up marijuana. No, I won't. Someday I'll stop picking up marijuana. For a long time, no endogenous ligands could be discovered that shared the cannabinoid receptors, but now we've discovered anandamide, of course, which triggers memory and hunger. This is one of the reasons, since this receptor site is being taken up by the marijuana, that's why you get the munchies after you smoke pot. Because it tells you that you're still hungry. Even if you've just eaten, it makes you feel like you're hungry. This is the area of your brain that tells you when you're hungry. What time is it? No, I got 3 minutes. I'm okay. THC receptors are found in the hippocampus, cerebellum, substantia nigra, and the cerebral cortex. The receptors reduce sensitivity to pain, and that's why it does control pain. It reduces sensitivity to temperature, which is always funny. These guys sitting around with hardly any clothes on. And it's cold there, you know, or they're sitting outside smoking pot with hardly any clothes on. It reduces your movement, of course, and that doesn't make you a very good worker. And it reduces responses to external stimuli. So, and that's always funny too. So you can imagine if some lady's outside toking, she comes in to be a waitress, how functional she is. For one thing, she's got no memory, so she has to write everything down. But look, I mean, it reduces your movement, and it controls all this stuff, so you can't read her handwriting. I mean, it was just really crazy. So he would have to go to the table and ask her what the order was, and she'd rip the thing off and give it to him. And of course, he can't read her handwriting. Then he'd go back. He'd finally figure out what they wanted to eat. He'd take it back to the back, and those guys, the guys that are cooking, have been smoking pot as well. So they'll get around to it when they feel like it, because they can't function very well. So he'd have to go back and cook. You can imagine what a horrible situation it was for him. Didn't enjoy it at all. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick up alcohol next time. I've already picked on marijuana. Next time I'm going to pick on alcohol and tell you all the horrible things that happens to you when you get drunk. Those of us who don't drink.